For a while now, there's been quiet talk about strange things happening at sea, especially in the Black Sea. And even though it doesn't always grab headlines the way ground battles do, what's going on out there matters a lot. Recently, the spotlight landed on Ukraine after reports came out saying that a Russian Shadow Fleet oil tanker had been taken out of action. At first glance, it might sound like just another wartime incident, but once you dig into it, there's a whole bunch of layers underneath that explain why this matters far beyond a single ship. The basic idea is that Ukraine is at war with Russia, so attacks on Russian assets aren't surprising. But what makes this situation different is the kind of ship involved and the method used to hit it. The tanker wasn't part of a normal, clearly identified Russian fleet. Instead, it belonged to what's known as Russia's Shadow Fleet, a collection of oil tankers that operate in a gray zone, often hiding their true ownership and movements. These ships exist mainly to help Russia keep selling oil despite Western sanctions. So when one of them gets disabled, it hits Moscow where it hurts most: money. This particular attack brought attention back to one of Ukraine's most unusual and effective tools at sea, something called the Sea Baby. If you're not familiar with it, the Sea Baby isn't a traditional weapon like a missile or a torpedo launched from a big warship. It's an unmanned surface vehicle, basically a drone designed to move across water, and it's been developed and used by Ukraine's security service, also known as the SBU, since the early stages of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. The Sea Baby can be configured in different ways depending on the mission. Sometimes it's packed with explosives and sent on a one-way trip to ram into a target. Other times it carries specialized equipment, which makes it more flexible than people might expect. That adaptability is a big reason why it has become such a headache for Russian forces, especially in areas where Ukraine can't safely deploy large ships or aircraft. Although Sea Baby drones feel like a recent innovation, they've already built up a serious combat record. One of the moments that really put them on the map happened in July 2023, when two of these drones were used to strike the Crimean Bridge. That bridge is more than just infrastructure. It's a symbolic and strategic link between Russia and occupied Crimea, so damaging it sent a loud message. The attack caused real structural damage, including to the bridge span itself, and showed that Ukraine could hit high-value targets even when heavily defended. A couple of months later, in September 2023, the SBU claimed another success when it said a Sea Baby drone struck the Russian corvette Samum. Not long after that claim, video surfaced showing the ship being towed while leaning noticeably to one side, which suggested it had taken on water or suffered internal damage. That visual evidence made the claim harder to dismiss, and it added to the growing sense that these sea drones were more than just experimental weapons. Then in October 2023, a Russian patrol ship called Pavel Derzhavin was reportedly damaged by another Sea Baby attack. By December of the same year, yet another vessel, the reconnaissance and hydrographic ship Vladimir Kozitsky, was also hit. Taken together, these incidents painted a clear picture. Ukraine wasn't just testing these drones, it was actively integrating them into a wider naval strategy. Russia, of course, didn't sit back and accept this quietly. In May 2024, Russian forces released footage showing a Ki-29 helicopter firing on a Sea Baby drone. What made that incident especially interesting was the revelation that the drone had been armed with an R-73 infrared missile, apparently meant for self-defense against helicopters. One missile even seemed to have been fired before the drone was destroyed by gunfire. That moment showed just how far the technology had evolved, because an unmanned boat defending itself against aircraft wasn't something most people expected to see. Later in December 2024, Ukraine revealed another upgrade. This time, Sea Baby drones had been fitted with mounted machine guns and used in an attack near Crimea. Video footage showed these drones firing at Russian patrol boats and even at armed Mi-8 helicopters. According to the SBU, several helicopters and boats were damaged during that operation. By that point, it was clear that the Sea Baby wasn't just a floating bomb anymore. It had turned into a multi-role combat platform. All of that history leads directly to the present situation, where Ukraine reportedly struck an oil tanker belonging to Russia's Shadow Fleet in the Black Sea. According to an official from the SBU, The attack took place during a joint operation involving both the security service and the Ukrainian Navy. This wasn't a one-off event either, because it was already the third attack on Russian tankers within a 2-week period. That detail alone matters, because it shows a pattern rather than an accident. Ukraine appears to be deliberately targeting the logistics that allow Russia to keep exporting oil, even though sanctions are supposed to limit that trade. Russia has been relying on hundreds of tankers that sail under different flags and often turn off their tracking systems so they can quietly move oil to buyers willing to look the other way. The tanker involved in this specific incident was called the Dashan, and it was flying the flag of the Comoro Islands. According to a Ukrainian security source who spoke to CNN, the ship suffered what was described as critical damage, with early information suggesting it had been disabled. Russia didn't immediately comment on the incident, which often happens in these cases, especially when the details aren't flattering. Video obtained by CNN showed what appeared to be a Sea Baby drone diving beneath the tanker, followed by a series of explosions near the stern. Thick smoke then rose up around the vessel, which strongly suggested internal damage rather than just a surface-level hit. Although it wasn't immediately clear what kind of cargo the ship was carrying at the time, the situation raised obvious concerns about a potential oil spill, even though no confirmation of that came right away. According to the SBU source, the Dashan had been moving at top speed through Ukraine's exclusive economic zone, and its transponder was turned off when it was hit. That's an important detail, because turning off transponders is one of the key tactics Shadow Fleet ships use to avoid detection and scrutiny. The vessel was reportedly heading toward Novorossiysk, a major Russian oil port and a crucial hub for exports. That port had already been targeted the previous month when Ukraine struck one of Russia's largest oil export facilities there. Both sides acknowledged that earlier attack, and it was widely seen as an escalation in Ukraine's campaign to hit Russia's war economy rather than just its frontline forces. From Kiev's perspective, every dollar earned from oil helps fund the invasion, so disrupting that flow becomes a strategic goal. An SBU source summed it up by saying that the agency continues to take active measures to reduce oil revenue flowing into the Russian budget. In practical terms, that means using unconventional tools like sea drones to go after ships that keep Russia's oil trade alive. The SBU also noted that similar strikes in late November had already dealt what it called a significant blow to Russian oil transportation. All of this unfolded against a complicated political backdrop. Around the same time as the tanker attack, U.S. President Donald Trump made comments suggesting that Russia had the upper hand in the war and that Ukraine was losing. Those remarks sparked pushback from multiple Ukrainian and European officials, who argued that while Ukraine's situation is undeniably difficult, there's no clear evidence that Russia is on the verge of outright victory. Officials speaking to CNN said there haven't been any new U.S. or European assessments showing a dramatic shift on the battlefield in Russia's favor. Although the war remains grinding and costly, they stress that claims of imminent Ukrainian defeat don't line up with current intelligence. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts haven't stopped. Talks around a U.S. proposed peace framework between Ukraine and Russia have continued, even though they haven't produced a breakthrough yet. At the same time, planning for the future has been quietly moving forward. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that U.S. and Ukrainian delegations met virtually to discuss reconstruction and economic development once the war ends. According to Zelensky, the U.S. side included Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. The discussions reportedly covered ideas for recovery, funding mechanisms, and broader visions for rebuilding Ukraine. Zelensky said there were many concepts on the table that could work if handled correctly, and he also mentioned that Ukraine updated its thoughts on a 20-point framework for ending the war. He publicly thanked Trump and his team for their efforts and support, although independent outlets like the Kiev Independent noted that they couldn't verify all claims related to the tanker strike or the full extent of the damage. According to the SBU, the Dashan itself was valued at around $30 million, and on a typical voyage it could carry oil products worth roughly $60 million. The European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Switzerland had already sanctioned the vessel due to its role in transporting Russian oil and operating with its identification systems turned off. From Ukraine's point of view, that made it a legitimate target within the broader economic war. To really understand why all this matters, you have to understand what the Russian shadow fleet actually is. In simple terms, it's a hidden network of ships designed to get around sanctions imposed after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. These sanctions included a price cap on Russian crude oil set by G7 countries and the European Union, so Russia needed a workaround to keep exporting energy. Shadow fleets weren't invented by Russia. Countries like Iran and Venezuela had already been using similar methods for years. Russia anticipated sanctions and started preparing early by buying older tankers, often near the end of their service life. These ships were either bought directly by Russian entities or by intermediaries who could rent them out at high prices. As demand for these vessels grew, the prices of old tankers shot up and sellers made large profits. By the end of 2022, estimates suggested there were already over 600 ships in Russia's shadow fleet, with around 400 of them being crude oil tankers. By December 2023, that number had grown dramatically, with estimates ranging from 1,100 to 1,400 ships. Yet only a small fraction of them have been sanctioned by Western governments, and even fewer have been sanctioned by all major authorities at the same time. One of the biggest issues with the shadow fleet is insurance. Western insurance markets require inspections and proof that ships meet certain safety standards. Many shadow fleet vessels either use insurers that aren't transparent or operate with no clear insurance at all. In fact, about 2/3 of ships carrying Russian oil reportedly have unknown insurers. Because these ships are often old and poorly maintained, they're more prone to accidents like breakdowns or leaks. In January 2024, for example, an 18-year-old sanctioned tanker called the Priya suffered an anchor failure in the Bosphorus, blocking traffic through one of the world's busiest waterways. Incidents like that highlight how these vessels pose risks not just politically, but environmentally and economically as well. Owners of shadow fleet ships usually hide behind shell companies and flags of convenience, so they don't feel pressured to maintain high safety standards. Turning off identification systems and conducting ship-to-ship oil transfers in open waters further increases the risk of collisions and spills. Certain countries' flags are especially popular for these operations. Ukraine has been tracking all of this closely. By November 2025, the Ukrainian government was managing a catalog listing around 1,240 ships believed to be part of the shadow fleet. There have also been multiple mysterious attacks on ships connected to Russian oil trade outside the Black Sea. Several vessels that had recently visited Russian ports were hit by limpet mines or underwater explosives in the Mediterranean. A report by security firm Ambry suggested these attacks were likely carried out by an unnamed state actor using divers and delayed action explosives. 2 ships were sunk outright, including the freighter Ursa Major off Spain and the supertanker Koala while docked at Ust-Luga. Others were damaged. Although no official investigation has publicly confirmed who was behind these attacks, many security analysts privately believe there's a connection to the war in Ukraine. According to industry sources cited by Lloyd's List, the U.S. may have quietly warned Ukraine earlier in the year that if it was involved in such operations, they should stop. Even so, former Royal Navy officer Tom Sharp has argued that targeting oil tankers through precise sabotage is a highly effective form of unconventional warfare. It hits Russia's revenue streams without directly escalating into open conflict with NATO. More recently, in late November 2025, Turkey reported attacks on 2 shadow fleet tankers off its Black Sea coast. One suffered minor damage, while the other experienced an explosion that forced its crew to evacuate. Ukraine later claimed responsibility, again citing the use of Sea Baby drones. Taken as a whole, these events show how the war has expanded beyond trenches and missile strikes into a complex battle over logistics, money, and maritime routes. Ukraine's use of Sea Baby drones against Russia's shadow fleet isn't just about sinking ships. It's about undermining the financial systems that keep the war going, even though the fighting itself remains brutally difficult on land. In that sense, every disabled tanker becomes part of a much larger story, one where innovation, economics, and unconventional tactics are shaping the future of the conflict just as much as traditional military power. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.